Hey, what's up? It's Justice. I'm not very good at voiceovers, so I've decided that I'm just going to talk about what I'm seeing on the screen and hopefully you understand it. So I decided to build a stool, and I only have a table saw, so basically I bought some S2S 8/4 walnut from the local lumber store, and I needed a way to joint the edge. I created this plywood strip by cutting a piece of plywood into a strip. I know, revolutionary. Anyways, I tried my best to get the walnut straight as possible on this sled with an overhang, so that way I can use the straight edge of the plywood against the fence of the table saw. And I went through the table saw with like the tiniest little passes so that I would get one perfectly straight edge on the board. As you can see, I did many small passes here. I took a little sweeping up break because I also don't have a shop vac yet. When I removed the sled, I was able to use the other side of the wood that was now straight to get the other side straight, and that way they're both perfectly parallel, even if they're not, like, you know, aligned perfectly with the ends. And yeah, I did that to both boards, and boom, they're straight. So then I needed a way to cross-cut them, again, only with the table saw, but since I wasn't absolutely sure that the ends of the board is a 90-degree angle because of the way I did the sled, I needed a way to guarantee that, and the only way would be a cross-cut sled that I can use the new flat edge of my boards as like the guide, I guess. So I followed a tutorial for this part. I created the runners with a thin strip of plywood, and then I used a thicker piece of plywood up against the fence while the runners were in those grooves, put some weight on top, and that way it would be kind of secured down. I made some thicker pieces to be the front and back fence of the sled, and as you can see, it's sledding along perfectly. I screwed the front and back fence on so that the screws were not sticking out, and I realized I don't have a square. I had that T-square, so I biked, got a square, last one, perfect. And once that back one was screwed in, I used it, and then I referenced the blade into the front one, screwed that in, and voila, here I cut all my boards. They're perfectly square now, and I had exactly 15.5-inch long pieces, and I only needed 4, so I didn't even have to buy 2 of those boards. I don't know why I did that, but now I have a lot of extra. I recut out my template and made sure that each cut would fit on my boards. I arranged them here, and then I traced them onto those boards so that I would remember. As you can see, they all fit, and then I started cutting them apart. So I was doing pretty wide cuts here, not trying to go up close to any piece, but just making sure that I had them all individually cut. A lot of walking back and forth here, cutting things out on the table saw. The table saw is basically my only tool right now, so I wanted to do everything on it. This piece was the only piece that was too wide to fit on the 8/4, so I had to glue up an extra piece. I don't know why I didn't cut that piece smaller first, but I just glued it on up. And I used an extra piece of that plywood as a guide to make sure it stayed straight all the way down. So now all of my pieces are cut apart. Here's how it's looking without that one that's gluing up. And the angle. This is my bane of my existence. I clearly cannot do math, because when you look at that, it's not the right angle, but I looked at it and I said, yes, that is the right angle. Let's do it. And then I measured it like twice more, and I had like a little angle gauge. I was looking at it from all angles, and I cut it, and it was not right. Way too steep of an angle. And here I'm like, yes, I've got it again. No, I did not. It's not 90 degrees. It looks close, but it's not. And so I devised the most ingenious strategy ever. I angled one edge flat against the table saw, and then the other I glued and clamped this like guide, and I turned the table saw blade 90 degrees, and boom, perfect 90-degree angle. And now that I had that technique down, when I unclamped this one, it had a similar angle issue here, and I just did the same thing right away. I cut close enough on one. Wrong, look at that, wrong angle, cut it, but I was like, whatever, I just need it to be 90. It's only touching one piece, so I used the sled maneuver again, and got a perfect 90-degree angle. You just gotta work with things as they happen, and it's all about creative problem solving and woodworking. And I was so excited, it's really coming together. So back to the table saw again. I was cutting as many straight edges on these pieces as possible. I knew that some areas needed to be perfectly straight and others just need to be close enough and curved. So here I am cutting out the rest of like the excess off of these pieces as much as I can with a straight blade. Sometimes I had to take the blade guard off, sometimes I kept it on. And here now I'm ready to cut these angles. So these angles I don't have to worry about so much. They just have to be kind of close-ish. They don't have to be exact like the first two, so I won't need to do that sled maneuver again. And yeah, I'm cutting up all sorts of things, and here's how it was looking, starting to get more angled. And now I needed to knock down those angles to be smooth, so I pulled out some little hand planes, my little baby hand plane. And yeah, I was not feeling the clamp, then I was not feeling against the clamp, then I was like, I'm gonna glue it down with tape, and that kind of worked for a minute, didn't really work that well. And I was tired of all the scraps being in the back of the shop when I would have to eventually sweep them to the front of the shop. Oh, and then I took a break to sand on concrete. Why did I do that? No, putting a piece of plywood underneath does not help. Learned my lesson there. So I created a custom clamp, exactly 15.5 inches wide, so all of my pieces will fit in there, and glued that together and clamped it to the side of the table saw, and that worked a lot better. As you can see, I can place each piece in there and then it will not slide around at all, and I can sand, chisel, scrape away at it as I please. So once that was down, it was hand plane central. All of my pieces had rounded edges, so I switched between using an 80 grit sandpaper and the hand planes. I had that blue one, which is a little bit bigger, then I had the teeny tiny brass ones. It was very satisfying, honestly. I really enjoyed doing this part. To see like each scrape, you know, is very cathartic. Some pieces had this undercut that the hand planes wouldn't get to, so I luckily had some hand carving tools. I know this is probably a terrible technique, but it got the job done, and then I was able to sand it and get everything done. I had to use the hand tools quite a lot, but once again, even though it looks awful and like wobbly and stuff right here, once I got everything sanded, it was looking real pretty. You wouldn't have even known. But I showed you, so now you know. And here's how it was looking. Starting to get pretty smooth, everything's kind of fitting together, and so I wanted to begin finishing everything up. This time I went to 180 sandpaper and then 220. I mastered this kind of over-under technique to get things round, and then I also used hand sanding. Finally, time to glue up, and I was like, yes, this is perfect. I'm going to use these 2 strips of wood to keep these 2 pieces aligned, and they won't like shift around on me. Little do I know that when you have squeeze out from one piece and you use a wood piece, it's gonna glue itself to the thing. So after I had glued this other piece, which worked out fine, I used clamps and some tape for this one to keep it aligned. I took this one out. It looks awesome. It's this central piece. And then here it comes. I'm waiting for it to come around on the camera. Oh yeah, these guys, they were stuck. I had to use a chisel. And lo and behold, even with the chisel, I chipped it. I chipped the end of my piece. I was so disappointed. The other side came off fine, and this one, no. Chipped it right off. I used a chisel to keep it smooth again, and then I figured I would just use some wood filler on the end eventually. Back to sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. This is probably the most sanding I've ever done on a project. I really usually skimp out on sanding, and I'm like, no. This time I want it to actually feel smooth once I've done everything. Here I'm gluing up one of the T pieces, kind of the branch off to the left. And you'll notice I'm using a metal ruler to align things now. No more wood that could get glued together. And this is the bottom piece. The beginning pieces were easy to use clamps on, but later on it became a little bit more difficult to get things around or to get the right kind of clamping pressure, so I ended up using rubber bands for most of this. I used a lot of rubber bands, and I was able to get squeeze out with them, so I knew that the pressure was pretty solid. There's not going to be a lot of force on these pieces, so I think that just glue is fine. Yeah. Here it goes. Looking pretty good. Gonna glue this piece together now. Check out that sick glue technique. And all the rubber bands. And I waited overnight for everything to glue up. Boom. Okay, so at this point I was like, I need to get things pretty finished because you can see that it's going to be really hard to get in between those crevasses once everything is glued on. I also went in with sandpaper and added a rounded edge to all of the edges to create a little bit of a smoother look. Lots of sanding. And look, I got a shop vac. Pretty exciting development. I created a little bit of filler here for that gap and kind of a couple other gaps that had appeared. And that sanded down pretty nicely. Then I used a test piece, cleaned it with mineral spirits, put the stain on, and put the wipe on poly. I waited 24 hours between each coat of anything. I did one coat of stain and one coat of wipe on poly. I think that it turned out great. I wanted to test it out and make sure before I did it on the real piece. And yeah, here it is. Before stain, I was cleaning it off with the mineral spirits, make sure there was no sanding dust left. And then I put the stain on, making sure to get in all the nooks and crannies. And then I did one glue up. I did them one at a time and gave 24 hours between each one. This one I used rubber bands. Again, I think it was actually pretty easy with the rubber bands. Once you get enough on there, you can kind of pull and twist them. And then I did add one clamp with some paper towels wrapped around the head so that it wouldn't mess up the finish. Then here it goes, the final clamp, final glue up. This one I was actually able to use clamps on. It kind of created that nice angle. It looks like there's a gap there, but that's just because there's like an angle on the end of that piece of wood that I messed up on, but it's the bottom, so it's fine. And then, oh my gosh, it was done. I'm so happy with how it turned out. It looks amazing in the sunlight. It's the perfect little stool / side table. I'm not going to put glass on top. I really want those natural features to show through. And I learned so much doing this project. I'm so happy with how it turned out. Yay!